read-alouds and why they matter. Reading aloud, let me preface that, is when the teacher is reading the book to the students are just listening. So it's not that the kids are reading, it's that the teacher is reading. So that's what I mean when I talk about read-alouds. So, if this was small. This is just a nice little quote. I just kind of liked it. It says, we have an obligation to read aloud to our children, to read them things that they enjoy, to read them stories that we are already tired of, and to do the voices and make them interesting, and not to stop reading to them just because they learn to read themselves. So I think that's a big deal. Just because they know how to read themselves doesn't mean that we shouldn't be reading aloud to them. Okay. So my question at the top, which you can't really see, is why spend time reading aloud to students who can already read? So shouldn't they be practicing their own reading skills? So that's something that we focus on a lot here, obviously, is like, well, they should be practicing reading. But there's other benefits of reading out loud. So there's a lot of research that actually shows that reading aloud, teachers that read aloud consistently to their classes, they do better with comprehension, they do better with vocabulary, and some other things. So I'll put those up here. One of the major studies was a study called Becoming a Nation of Readers. That was a major study that was done back in the mid-'80s. And these are a couple of quotes from it. So they said, the single most important activity for building the knowledge required for eventual success in reading is reading aloud to children. So that was a comment made about sort of the younger elementary, but not just kindergarten to first, so like kindergarten, first, and second, that reading aloud to them is a really big factor in how successful they are later. And then the last one on this slide, reading aloud should be emphasized not only in the home, but also in the classroom continuously throughout grades K through 12. So that means even in high school there's benefits. Alright, so what are some of the differences I have up here between avid readers and reluctant readers? So I wanted to get your guys', because you guys have people in your classrooms that are avid readers, and then you have some that are like, they don't want to read for anything. So what are some of the differences between those students?
I would say that when I hear kids read who are avid readers, I hear them use the different voices of the characters that they're reading about. Even though this might be the first time that they've read the story, they can still recognize the characters' voices. So I hear that sometimes when I hear kids read aloud.
Okay, yeah, so the avid readers, they have better fluency. What else? Something else?
I'd say that a big difference between an avid reader and a reluctant reader, and then the third column of just poor reader. A reluctant reader isn't necessarily one who's a poor reader. A reluctant reader can be an amazing reader, they just don't like to read. My father was like that. He's probably read half a book his entire life, but he's amazingly good reader. He can do it great. He just had no desire to ever read a book. And then an avid reader would be one that, with any of their free time, with any of their extra time, they would much rather sit and read a book, go through and read those books themselves. They can get buried in the book, and they don't get tired of it. A reluctant reader, it's more of a punishment. It's not necessarily that they're any better or worse of a reader, it's just they don't particularly like that task at all.
Okay, good. So, I mean, we kind of got it. The kids that are avid readers, yeah, they enjoy reading for the sake of reading. And you're right, it doesn't necessarily have to do with their skill level, although often in times it does. But as teachers, we would prefer for all of our students to be avid readers. So doing read-alouds can help, not for every single student, but for a lot of students, it can help the reluctant readers to become avid readers because they can get more into a book. So the way that I described that was being inside a book versus outside a book. So the students that have better fluency, the students that can hear the voices, they get into a book, they're like really into it. And the kids who don't necessarily enjoy it as much, they're probably feeling like they're more on the outside of the book. So they're reading it, they might be comprehending it, but they don't really love it. They're not inside the story. And so read-alouds can really help bring kids inside of a book. The other thing, especially for our poor readers that can affect them, is some of these things. So when they're reading on their own, they're struggling with decoding. They might be struggling with vocabulary, especially our ESL or ELL students, or just comprehension. You can have a kid who decodes just fine, but they don't comprehend what they read. It'd be like if you are reading like a medical journal. Like you can probably read it, but you don't really know what it means. So when we do read-alouds, we're taking all of those things off of the child's mind, so they don't have to be decoding, they can hear the comprehension easier because of the intonation of your voice, and so then you're allowing them to like free up their brain space for actually thinking about the story. And they can think about the characters, you can talk about the vocabulary, they can learn new vocabulary in context. So those are some of the benefits. I wrote those like that. Okay, so those are all the same ones. And then I'm also going to say that this stuff doesn't just happen from just reading the book out loud and then closing it and then we're done. The benefits that we see when we're talking about like the studies that I talked about, like vocabulary and comprehension, that comes from when you've read a story and then you discuss the story, you do writing activities based on the story, you have student discussions based on the story, you have a word wall with the words from the story. That's incorporating all that together is when you see the benefits. It's not purely just reading aloud. That's like the catalyst for it. Okay. Also, one of the big ones is that when we do a read aloud, it shows the kids what it's like or what it should be like when they're reading independently. So they should know that the words should come alive. They should be into a book. If they hear a read aloud, then they know when they read on their own, then they should have a picture of the story in their mind because they're more likely to when you're reading out loud. They should think about their reading. If you're reading out loud and you model what it looks like to stop and ask a question about a character, get opinions, talk about a vocabulary word, then they'll take that into their independent reading and they'll be like, oh, I should be thinking about what I'm reading, thinking about the characters and how it relates to me. Okay, and then some of the other things that I just wrote as benefits, and some of these are from studies and a lot of these are just from my own self because I've always done read alouds in my own classroom. Again, it's a good example of modeling thinking and questioning during reading. These are some books that I've read to my students, fourth grade up through 6th grade. And I've been able to have discussions with kids about what it looks like to stand up for other people, like social justice, like the way that you treat animals, empathy. I've had great discussions based on these particular books, but because we did read alouds. One of the other things is that students can become hooked on a book and they want to reread it. So when I read read alouds in my classroom, I would always put it back on the shelf, and I had so many kids who wanted to read the book again. And rereading is perfect. That's a great way to build comprehension. I put this one up here because this is a great example. I read the first Harry Potter book in my 6th grade class last year, and I had 2 students who were the reluctant readers. It didn't mean they couldn't read, but they just didn't like reading. And they would read nothing besides graphic novels. That was the only thing I could get them to read. And then I read Harry Potter, and both of the kids read the rest of the series within that year. And one of my students who didn't like reading or writing started writing about Harry Potter. So she started writing like fan fiction, and she sends me emails still of her like Harry Potter writing. She just writes for fun and sends it to me. That would not have happened if I had not read this book aloud in my classroom. So it can be really important. And then some of the other ones is just like developing awareness and tolerances for people that are just different. I always use read alouds a lot in my class if we were having issues. So one of the books over here, Because of Mr. Terup, that's a book about kids in a classroom that do not get along. And it's how they all end up coming together. And it's been, when I taught, especially the older, like 4th, 5th grade, it's a great book for that because they talk about each character, how they end up working together. Wonder is a great book. I had a kid in my class last year that was on the autism spectrum, and but like very mild, just enough to be like that socially awkward. And we were having all these problems with kids bullying and making fun of him and doing all this stuff. So I read this book, which is about a child that has like a facial deformity, and it's all about like accepting other people regardless of how they looked. And it's not like the whole problem just went away, but it was so much better. And I could have like referred to that book all year long, and it made a huge difference in just my classroom community. And that's another one. A Long Walk to Water is just a good one for like kind of global awareness. So at the end, we're just like fostering a love of reading. So yes, we want to teach kids. We want to go through our curriculum, and we want them to know how to read. We want them to go through our writing curriculum. But not making time for a 15-minute or 20-minute read aloud a day is doing our students a disservice because there's so much more that's outside of their textbooks that they could be learning and that they could be gaining knowledge from, and not just like about the world, but even about, you know, writing, vocabulary, all that kind of stuff. So I'm encouraging you, when you have time, to add Read Aloud and to add it in the schedule next year.
In my classroom, I try to do read alouds several books a year. I've done it since the beginning. I really wholeheartedly believe in everything that you're saying about that, and I've seen the benefits of doing the read alouds and being able to have them. And the 10-minute indoor recess, my students a lot of the times would rather have me read to them than having an indoor recess. Just they can draw quietly at their desk while I'm reading, and a lot of them don't even draw. They just sit and look and read. And you know, being able to go through, I've probably made it through 4 or 5 books already this year, and it really is beneficial. And in my class right now, to be able to find books to tie into our reading mastery stories too is kind of fun. So like we do the Odysseys, they do a lot of Greek mythology, and then so I'm reading Percy Jackson and going through those series with the books, and you know, being able to see that those themes in their reading mastery stories that are connected right in these new books and stuff, they get a real kick out of that. You know, seeing the writings and things, and it does really kind of gets them wanting to read and look at books and really delve into it better. You know, being able to find it. I think it is worth finding those minutes to be able to go through and read with the students, as opposed to just have a free time or let's use this time to review your spelling words again or something like that. You know, having that time to be able to go through and get them to actually like reading really pays off.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. It's like you find 10 minutes or 15 minutes, or like, I mean, it rains so much here. You just do it during your indoor recess time. But you're right. When I read read alouds in my class, and I would mix it up. So some were fantasy, like I said, I did Harry Potter. I did a story that was like historical fiction, and they all thought, they were like, this is boring. And by like the middle, like maybe even like the 3rd or 4th chapter, they would ask me to read the book, because I make sure to choose the books that are super exciting for them. But that's what we really want. And then, then if you only have 5 or 10 minutes, they're asking you to read it, so then you can read it and you can use that time.
Yeah, so when I taught 3rd grade for a couple years, I would, like Mr. Benassi, I would always find that 10 to 15 minutes, and I would do read alouds too. And the kids loved it while they're doing, maybe at the end of the day, they're getting ready to go home, and I would just pull the book out, and they just loved it.
They have to be quiet to hear the book.
Yes.
Yes.
and they're into the story, so they really want to listen to the story. And I know that other teachers, we have, Mrs. Benassi does it every day. I remember when I was doing, for a little while, kindergarten up at Reynolds, we would always start the day off with a couple of short, like, picture books. And every day we started it off with a couple of read alouds, and kids loved it. It's
Kindergarten
a good way.
and 1st grade are like the most common that we still see read alouds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The upper grades definitely benefit from it.
Yeah.
That's all I have.